What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars completely loses control on live television? It only took 33 seconds of escalating tension before Chris Pratt was escorted off the set of the Graham Norton Show in what witnesses are calling the most shocking celebrity meltdown in talk show history. The evening started like any other taping. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement. Cameras were positioned perfectly, and Graham Norton was doing what he does best, preparing to make his guests feel comfortable and entertained. Chris Pratt was scheduled as the lead guest, there to promote his latest blockbuster film. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. But beneath the surface, something was brewing that nobody could have predicted. Graham opened the show with his signature warmth and charm. The audience applauded as Chris Pratt walked out onto the stage, waving and smiling that famous smile everyone knows. He sat down on the iconic red couch, and Graham welcomed him with genuine enthusiasm. "Chris, wonderful to have you here tonight," Graham said, his voice full of that friendly energy that makes guests feel at home. Chris nodded, but something was different. His smile seemed tight. His eyes had an edge that wasn't quite right. "Thanks for having me," Chris replied, but the words came out flat, almost mechanical. Graham, ever the professional, pushed forward. He started asking about the new film, about the stunts, about working with the cast. Standard talk show questions that usually lead to fun stories and audience laughter. But Chris's answers were short, clipped. He wasn't giving Graham anything to work with. The audience started to notice. You could feel the energy in the room shifting. This wasn't the playful, goofy Chris Pratt everyone expected. This was someone else entirely. Graham tried a different approach. He brought up a funny moment from one of Chris's previous films, hoping to lighten the mood and get things back on track. The audience chuckled, remembering the scene. But Chris didn't laugh. He stared at Graham with this look that made everyone uncomfortable. "You think that's funny?" Chris asked, his tone sharp. Graham paused. He clearly wasn't expecting that response. But he's a pro, so he smiled and tried to play it off. "Well, yes, I mean, it was a comedic scene, wasn't it?" Graham said, still keeping his tone light and friendly. "You know what I think is funny?" Chris said, leaning forward. "I think it's funny how talk show hosts like you think you can just bring people on, ask whatever you want, and we're supposed to dance like puppets." The studio went silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats. The other guests, who were waiting backstage, were apparently watching monitors with their mouths hanging open. This wasn't banter. This wasn't a bit. This was real tension, real hostility, happening right there in front of everyone. Graham, to his credit, kept his composure. His face showed concern, not anger. He wasn't going to escalate this. He was going to try to calm things down. "Chris, I'm not sure what's upset you, but we're just here to have a good time and talk about your work," Graham said gently. "If there's something bothering you, we can take a break." But Chris wasn't interested in taking a break. He was just getting started. "You want to know what's bothering me?" Chris said, his voice getting louder. "What's bothering me is sitting here, being treated like some product you're selling. You don't care about me. You don't care about the film. You just care about your ratings." The audience was frozen. Nobody knew whether to gasp, to laugh nervously, or to stay completely silent. They chose silence. Graham took a breath. You could see him choosing his words carefully. "Chris, I assure you, we invited you here because people genuinely want to hear from you," Graham said. "Nobody is trying to use you. We respect you and your work." "Respect?" Chris laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter and harsh. "If you respected me, you wouldn't ask these stupid, surface-level questions. You'd actually care about what matters." Graham looked genuinely hurt by that. He's known for being one of the most thoughtful, prepared interviewers in the business. He does his research. He cares about his guests. And here was someone attacking that, attacking him personally on his own show. "I apologize if my questions haven't been what you hoped for," Graham said, and you could hear the sincerity in his voice. "What would you like to talk about?" But Chris didn't want to talk about anything. He wanted to fight. "See, that's the problem right there," Chris said, pointing at Graham. "You're so fake. All of this is fake. The smile, the laugh, the whole setup. You're just reading cards and pretending to care." The producers were scrambling backstage. Should they cut to commercial? Should they intervene? Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Graham Norton's show is supposed to be fun, relaxed, full of good stories and laughter. This was becoming a disaster. Graham sat back in his chair, and for just a moment, you could see the weight of the situation on his face. But then he composed himself again. Because that's what professionals do. "Chris, I think maybe we should take that break now," Graham suggested. "Give you a moment to collect yourself." "I don't need to collect myself," Chris snapped. "I'm perfectly collected. What I need is for you to stop acting like you're better than everyone else." That was it. That was the line. Because Graham Norton has never, not once, acted superior to anyone. He treats every guest, from the biggest stars to newcomers, with the same warmth and respect. He's beloved in the industry, specifically because he's the opposite of pretentious. "I have never thought I was better than anyone," Graham said, and now there was a firmness in his voice. Not anger, but strength. "And I certainly don't appreciate being spoken to this way on my own show, in front of my audience." Chris stood up from the couch. The sudden movement made everyone jump. "Your show?" Chris said. "Your show? None of this would exist without people like me coming on here. We make you relevant." The audience gasped. Actually gasped. Because that was beyond rude. That was cruel and completely uncalled for. Graham Norton is a legend. His show is an institution. He doesn't need any single guest to be relevant. Graham stood up too, but his body language was different. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being protective. Of himself. Of his show. Of the respectful space he'd created. "I think you need to leave," Graham said, his voice calm but absolute. "What?" Chris said, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I'm asking you to leave the show," Graham repeated. "This behavior is unacceptable. You're being disrespectful to me, to the crew, to the audience who came here to have an enjoyable evening. I won't tolerate it." Chris's face turned red. You could see the rage building. "You can't kick me off," Chris said. "Do you know who I am?" And there it was. The most entitled, out-of-touch thing someone can say. "Do you know who I am?" As if fame gives someone the right to treat others poorly. "I know exactly who you are," Graham said, "and right now, you're someone who needs to leave." The security team was already moving into position. They'd been signaled by the producers. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. "This is unbelievable," Chris said, looking around like he expected someone to defend him. But nobody did. Not the audience. Not the crew. Nobody. "You're making a huge mistake," Chris said to Graham. "A huge mistake. You have no idea what you're doing." Graham didn't respond to that. He just stood there, dignified and firm, waiting for Chris to leave. "Fine," Chris said, throwing his hands up. "Fine. I don't need this. I don't need you. I don't need any of this." He started walking toward the exit, but he couldn't help himself. He turned back one more time. "You're nothing without guests," Chris shouted. "Nothing." Graham still didn't take the bait. He just watched as security gently but firmly guided Chris toward the backstage area. The audience sat in stunned silence. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were looking at each other like, did that really just happen? The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this unprecedented moment. As Chris disappeared backstage, still shouting something that couldn't quite be heard, Graham turned back to face the audience. He took a deep breath. You could see him processing what had just occurred. Then, slowly, he sat back down in his chair. "Well," Graham said, and his voice was a little shaky, but trying to find humor. "That was unexpected." The audience didn't know how to respond at first. Then, one person started clapping. Then, another. Then, another. Within seconds, the entire studio was on their feet, giving Graham a standing ovation. They were applauding him for standing up for himself, for maintaining his dignity, for not allowing someone to turn his show into a platform for abuse. Graham looked genuinely moved by the response. His eyes were a little misty, but he was smiling. A real smile this time, not a professional one. "Thank you," he said to the audience. "Thank you so much. I've been doing this for a long time, and I can honestly say that's a first." The audience laughed, grateful for the tension breaking. "I want to apologize that you had to witness that," Graham continued. "This is supposed to be a fun show, a place where we celebrate talent and have a good laugh together. What just happened goes against everything we stand for here." More applause. The audience loved him even more for this. Backstage, Chris was apparently still causing problems. According to crew members, he was refusing to leave the building, demanding to speak to producers, threatening legal action, saying he'd been set up. None of it was true, of course. The whole thing had been captured on camera. There was no editing, no manipulation. Just a guest who came onto a show and decided to be hostile for reasons nobody could understand. Back on stage, Graham was trying to figure out how to continue the show. "We had other wonderful guests scheduled for tonight," Graham said to the audience, "and I promise you, we're going to bring them out, and we're going to have the lovely evening we all came here for. Because one person's bad behavior doesn't get to ruin everything." The audience cheered again. They were completely on Graham's side. Every single person in that studio had just watched a masterclass in how to handle a difficult situation with grace. The show's producer came out on stage briefly to talk to Graham. They had a quick, whispered conversation. Graham nodded, then turned back to the audience. "Apparently, our guest has left the building," Graham announced. "So, we can all breathe a little easier now." Laughter. Real, relieved laughter. "You know, in all my years of doing this, I've met thousands of actors, musicians, athletes, authors, every kind of person you can imagine," Graham said, speaking from the heart now. "And the vast majority of them are kind, professional, and genuinely lovely to talk to. What you witnessed tonight is not normal. It's not representative of this industry or the people in it." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I've always believed that being talented doesn't give anyone the right to be cruel," Graham continued. "Success doesn't mean you get to treat others poorly. And fame certainly doesn't put you above basic decency and respect." The audience was hanging on every word. This wasn't scripted. This was real emotion, real values being expressed in real time. "I started this show because I love connecting with people," Graham said. "I love hearing their stories, sharing laughs, creating moments that hopefully brighten someone's day. And I refuse to let anyone, no matter how famous, turn this into something negative." Standing ovation. Again. Even longer this time. One of the audience members shouted, "We love you, Graham," and others joined in with similar sentiments. It was this beautiful, spontaneous outpouring of support. Graham wiped his eyes quickly, trying to maintain his composure. "Right. Well, if you keep being this nice to me, I'm going to completely lose it," Graham joked, and everyone laughed. The other scheduled guests were brought out, and they all hugged Graham before sitting down. They'd watched everything from backstage, and they wanted him to know they supported him completely. One of them, a well-known actress, spoke directly about what had happened. "What you just did took incredible strength," she said to Graham. "Standing up for yourself, for your team, for basic respect. That's leadership." Graham looked uncomfortable with the praise. but he accepted it gracefully. "I just did what anyone should do when they're being treated badly," Graham said. "You don't accept it. You don't normalize it. You address it." The rest of the show was wonderful, full of the warmth and laughter that the Graham Norton Show is known for. The guests shared funny stories, there were games, there was wine, and the whole thing felt like a community coming together after a storm. But even as the show went on, even as everyone tried to return to normal, what had happened with Chris Pratt hung in the air. It was the elephant in the room that everyone was actively trying to forget. During a commercial break, Graham spoke to the audience off camera. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he said, "for supporting the show, for understanding that sometimes things don't go as planned. You've been absolutely wonderful." The audience applauded yet again. They felt like they'd been part of something significant, something that would be talked about for years to come. When the show wrapped, the audience filed out quietly, many of them on their phones, undoubtedly texting friends and family about what they'd just witnessed. The crew gathered around Graham, offering support and reassurance. He hugged several of them, clearly emotional about the whole experience. In the green room, the remaining guests stayed to check on Graham, making sure he was okay. They ordered food, poured drinks, and just sat with him while he processed everything. "This is what the industry is really like," they reminded him. "People supporting people, kindness, and professionalism. Not whatever had happened earlier." Graham kept saying he couldn't believe it had escalated so quickly. One minute, it was a normal interview. The next, it was a full-blown confrontation. He kept replaying it in his mind, wondering if he could have handled it differently, if there was something he'd missed. But everyone around him was adamant. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd been professional, patient, and kind, even in the face of unprovoked hostility. He'd given Chris multiple opportunities to calm down, to take a break, to reset. And when those opportunities were rejected, when the behavior continued and worsened, Graham had done the right thing by ending it. "You protected your space," one of the producers told him. "You protected all of us. That's what a good leader does." Outside the studio, news of what had happened was already spreading. People who'd been in the audience were posting about it. Crew members were texting friends. Within hours, it would be everywhere. But for now, in this moment, it was still contained to the people who'd witnessed it firsthand. Graham finally went home that night exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. He'd stood up for himself. He'd set a boundary. He'd shown that even in the entertainment industry, even when dealing with major stars, respect is non-negotiable. The footage of the confrontation would become one of the most watched moments in talk show history. People would analyze every word, every gesture, every facial expression. They'd debate whether Graham should have handled it differently, whether Chris had been provoked somehow, whether it was all a publicity stunt. But anyone who was actually there, anyone who saw it happen in real time, knew the truth. It was a guest who came on with an attitude, who took out his frustrations on an undeserving host, and who faced consequences for that behavior. It was a reminder that fame doesn't equal character, that success doesn't guarantee decency, and that sometimes the right thing to do is simply say enough is enough. Graham Norton had built his career on being welcoming, on making people feel comfortable, on creating a space where celebrities could relax and be themselves. But he'd also shown that kindness has limits, that respect goes both ways, and that no guest, no matter how big their name, gets to abuse that space or the people in it. The standing ovations he received that night weren't just for how he handled one difficult guest. They were for years of treating people well, for creating something positive in an industry that can often be cutthroat and cruel, for proving that you can be successful without compromising your values. As the studio lights were finally turned off and the building emptied out, the red couch sat there in the darkness, a silent witness to everything that had transpired. Tomorrow, there would be another taping, another group of guests, another audience. Life would go on. The show would continue. But this night, this particular episode, would be remembered. Not because of the celebrity who lost control, but because of the host who kept his. Not because of the outburst, but because of the grace under pressure. Not because of what went wrong, but because of how it was made right.